What's up, guys? Gons here for the Face Like the Sun YouTube channel. I want to talk about something called Deep Dream, and this was reported by Popular Science. If you go on Twitter, you can type in hashtag Deep Dream and see all the images with sort of a psychedelic trippiness to it, and I'll explain what's going on here. And the best way to actually do that is to just read this article called "Now You Can Turn Your Photos into Computerized Nightmares with Deep Dream. Is this the real life? Is this just fantasy?" Of course, that's the Queen line there, but let me just read this article for you, and I'll show you some images in the process. Quote, "Have you ever wondered how your computer sees the world? Spoiler alert, it's the stuff of psychedelic nightmares, as the internet found out last month when Google revealed that in order to sort and categorize images online, it uses an artificial intelligence program that looks for patterns and sometimes gets things wrong, finding random dog faces, swirls, and hands where there are none. Google opened the source up to developers under the name Deep Dream, and now a couple new websites have sprung up, and it lists those websites. Both take code from Google's AI and let you upload your own photos, transforming them into eerie, computerized dreamscapes. And here are some of the images. Let me show you some of them as I read the rest of this article. Google's artificial neural network, capital A, capital N with the lowercase s, are used to discern and process the millions of photos scraped by the search giant and organized in Google Images. In the case of Google Images, and Google's developers taught this artificial intelligence hive mind how to recognize certain objects by showing them repeated examples of said object. And it goes into an example of, let's say, a starfish. The program would tell it, this is a starfish, and then show, 5 or 6 pictures of a starfish, and the artificial intelligence would start to recognize what a starfish is. And then it goes on. Now you can produce your own psychedelic images with the Psychic VR Lab interface and Deep Neural Net Dreams. All you have to do is upload an image and wait for the code to transform into some kind of surrealist nightmare. Then post your creations to social media with the tag hashtag Deep Dream so other researchers can further study them. If you look at these images, I've been showing you some of them, they're very bizarre. Now, just full transparency here. Before I was saved, when I was in college, I indulged in some psychedelic drugs, okay? Nothing of the super heavy type, but I did do some psychedelic drugs, and, it was just the culture and the people around me. That's kind of what we were into at the time. And, I was a big fan of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas with Johnny Depp, and, a big fan of Hunter S. Thompson and stuff like that. So that was me back in college before I was saved. And so I understand sort of the psychedelic nature of stuff. Now, I've had a lot of friends who have done heavier psychedelic drugs, all the stuff that you hear about, ayahuasca, LSD, mescaline, the really heavy stuff. And the way they've explained what they see when they're on those drugs is very similar to what this Google artificial intelligence is coming up with when they recreate these images through the artificial neural network, or AN. And I find that very interesting because what I think might be going on here is, number one, we are feeding the artificial intelligence with our information, our reality, and therefore, this AI system, the technium, as some would call it, is made in the image of man, which is kind of scary because, of course, the Bible talks about how there's not one righteous man, and so that's kind of a scary thing. But also, I think this sort of thing is starting to show the bridge between the spiritual reality and the physical reality. Now, a lot of these images of people have eyes all over them, and I find that really fascinating because we know that there are descriptions of angelic beings in the Bible that talks about how they were covered with eyes. For example, in Ezekiel 10, it talks about the cherubim who were full of eyes all the way around, front and back, everywhere. Very interesting, very bizarre. Revelation 4 also talks about the living beings. They sound like the same description of the cherubim who were also covered with eyes. So when I see these images of people especially, and they're covered with eyes, it's just very bizarre to me. And it speaks to me, at least, this idea of perhaps, and this is just speculation here, the gap between the physical and the spiritual is being bridged by artificial intelligence like AN, the artificial neural network. Now, what a lot of these articles will tell you is that, the processing power is too slow and too low right now for the AI system to become sentient on its own. But I did a little reading on AN, the artificial neural network, And, it was just a basic paper on it. It was sort of for the layman. But basically, it talks about the networks and the emergent behavior. Quote, the interaction of nodes through the connections lead to a global behavior of the network, which cannot be observed in the elements of the network. This global behavior is said to be emergent. This means that the abilities of the network supersede the ones of its elements, making networks a very powerful tool. And of course, this is sort of basic theory in terms of, computer science, physics, mathematics, sociology, economics, telecommunications. The idea of an emergent aspect or quality of something is, it's part of, our philosophy in terms of different subject matters. But in terms of this particular artificial intelligence, we're talking about sentience being formulated. And I find it very fascinating altogether. Now, here are some more images. This was another Popular Science article titled, "These are what the Google Artificial Intelligence's dreams look like." And I mean, here you go. They're very trippy. They're very psychedelic in nature. And I just find it fascinating. I do think that there's something to this in terms of the spiritual subconscious perhaps being laid out. And, the whole thing is bizarre because what we're basically doing is the machine is basically created in man's image. But I think what's going to be even more bizarre is not just the artificial intelligence or sentient being that may emerge within the internet, but I think the tie-in with the quote-unquote great deception topic with aliens, that whole thing may have something to do with all of this. And the reason why I say that, and this is sort of from one passage here, but Revelation 13, we know that it talks about the first beast and then the second beast who, deploys the image of the beast and the mark of the beast and stuff like that. But I want to read for you Revelation 13, verse 14. Here's what it says. And by the signs that it was allowed to work in the presence of the beast, it deceives those who dwell on earth, telling them to make an image for the first beast that was wounded by the sword and yet lived. There's a lot of things to consider here. First off, the second beast here was allowed to perform signs in front of the first beast. And here's the fascinating part. It deceives those who dwell on earth. Why would there be a distinction there with those who dwell on earth? Wouldn't that mean that whatever is doing this whole thing is not from earth? Something to think about. The second beast here is called the beast that comes out of the earth, the one performing all of this, which is why there could be some sort of tie-in with this artificial intelligent being, because if it's out of the earth, right? If it's something that we created, then it would be out of the earth for sure. And the other part of it is it tells them to make an image for the first beast. In the KJV, and deceiveth them that dwell on the earth by the means of the miracles which he had power to do so in the sight of the beast, saying to them that dwell on the earth that they should make an image to the beast which had the wound by the sword and did live. And so this deception, whatever it is going to be, and I'm speculating here just in this moment that it could be some sort of extraterrestrial tie-in, that could be the culprit that leads to these miracles, which in turn will cause humanity to build an image to this first beast. And so the same way that we are using collective humanity to create this artificial intelligent sentient technium, and again, we're seeing sort of the results of the AI and how it quote unquote dreams and how it sees reality, which is very strange and bizarre and seems to reflect on sort of the psychedelic nature of what humans experience in what they would call spirituality and sort of a spiritual breaching, I would call it, into a dimension that we're actually not supposed to go into unless God takes us there. Could it be that humanity itself at this point in time will use the same methods to create a sort of copy or an image of this first beast that comes out of the sea that we read about earlier in Revelation 13? So lots to think about here, but there you go. I just wanted to show you guys this because this is how far things are coming. And again, they claim that, there's not enough processing power to do this on a global scale, blah, 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 but it's happening. It's absolutely happening. And Google's artificially intelligent network, the neural network, is alive. In so many ways, it is alive. We're still teaching it. We're nurturing it. But I think it goes back to that quote by Kevin Kelly, who said that, and I'm paraphrasing here, basically that in the technium, we're both creators of it and slaves to it, because ultimately what we're building is this sort of system that is going to enslave us. So anyway, I think all of this has to do with Bible prophecy. Again, timelines, I don't know, but I found it fascinating that this stuff is going on. It's out there. You can actually go to these websites, and I'll leave links in the description section, and upload your own image, see how the artificial intelligence of Google sees you. So there you have it. Hope you guys have a great day. God bless.